Good morning, everyone. If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Great, great, great. My name is Nancy Rembert, and I'm coming to you from the Alabama Department of Education. And today we have an exciting journey we have planned for you. Today's virtual field trip will take you on a journey into the life of Miss Helen Keller. Today's presenter is Miss Keller Thompson Johnson. Excuse me, Keller Johnson Thompson. That is a tongue twister, but we got it. But nevertheless, she has a wonderful presentation planned for you today that we sure you will enjoy. Just a few reminders, teachers, please make sure your students refrain from the chat room. Students, listen up. If you're on here, do not chat during the session unless Miss Thompson gives you a invite to join her in the chat room. Also, teachers, do not forget to send me your numbers. We need those numbers in order to keep providing these field trips. So that is very important. So send me your numbers either during or after this presentation. And at this time, we're going to turn it over to Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Rembert. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a great morning so far. I am. It's cold up here in North Alabama, where I am in Tuscumbia, Alabama, but it's a beautiful sunshiny day, and certainly we're thankful for that. Now, I work for the Helen Keller Foundation for Research and Education located in Birmingham, Alabama. But one of the things that is part of my job is to educate the public on Helen Keller. Helen Keller's in our history books, right? I mean, she represents our state in the United States Capitol. And it's certainly a lot going on in our capital today. But why is she there? Why do we read about her in our history books? Isn't she just a woman from Alabama? Actually, she's much more than that. She was my great aunt. And so through the years, I have studied her life. And I want to share that with you today. So we'll go ahead and get started. Now, I have video clips of Helen Keller that are very old. So, sometimes you're going to see some black and white videos with music in the background, nothing like is produced today. If you have any questions, if you'll hold them for the end, that way we'll be able to answer those questions. And if you'll just sit back and enjoy what you will learn on Helen Keller today, we'll get started. Before I introduce you to Helen Keller, I'd like to introduce you to her father. On the screen is Arthur H. Keller. He was from right here in Tuscumbia, Alabama. We're in the northwest corner of the state of Alabama, pretty close to Mississippi and about the same distance, about 25 miles from the Tennessee state line. We're right on the Tennessee River, and I'll show you that in a minute. But Arthur Keller was a very busy man. He not only ran Ivy Green, which was a working plantation at the time, but he also had a shipping business where he shipped goods to the north part and back to the south part of the Tennessee River. He also was an attorney. He was a newspaper owner and editor, and he owned a general store. So he had a lot going on and was a very busy man. But one day when he's in Memphis, Tennessee, he runs into this lady on your screen. Her name was Kate Adams. She was from the state of Arkansas, and she had been a teacher for a few years in Memphis, Tennessee. Well, as they ran into each other, and actually ran into each other because neither one of them were paying attention to what they were doing, they locked eyes. Arthur thought Kate was one of the most beautiful ladies that he had ever seen. And so in the awkwardness of the moment, he asked her to dinner that night. And the next night, and the next night. And before you know it, the two were what we call in love. Anyway, Arthur carried Kate back to Tuscumbia to be his bride. Now, if you look on the far left of your screen, you see a map. This is of the upper northwest corner of the state of Alabama. You see the big words Tennessee at the top of that map. And if you go down to the red star, you will see the words Colbert. You see, Tuscumbia is the county seat of Colbert County. Our courthouse is there in the middle, so you can get a glimpse of that, one of the biggest and most beautiful buildings in our town. And on the right is a steam engine. You see, back during these days, which were 1870s, the steam engine had come to Tuscumbia, and it was transporting goods in and out of the city. Passengers would ride from Decatur to Memphis, Tennessee on the train. And the train was a really big deal, and it made Tuscumbia a really, really busy little town. So Arthur brought Kate here to the family home, Ivy Green. We call it Ivy Green because it's got lots of English ivy that grows everywhere, especially the hot summers and wet springs that we have here in Northwest Alabama. Now, today, the home is a historic place that you can come and visit and learn many things about Helen Keller. And you're going to see the home in several videos. But when Arthur brought Kate, there was the big house that his sister lived in. And then there was a smaller house. And that smaller house and big house are still there today. Arthur decided it was best to bring Kate to the smaller house, that could be their little cottage for the first years of their marriage, because his older sister, Evelyn, lived in the main house. She was sort of bossy, and she had no idea until he showed up that he was bringing a wife with him. So everyone was surprised. There were no cell phones back then, no computers that you could say, get everything ready. I'm bringing a beautiful young lady home to be my wife. So Arthur and Kate settled down in the cottage. The cottage is my favorite building on site. It has one large room, and I'm just showing you part of it here, but it has a queen-size bed in it. It actually has a sitting area that Kate used for sewing, for reading, and then it has an enclosed back porch where they ate their meals. It also has a front porch that you saw earlier, and they sat out on the front porch a lot and just talked about the day's activities. They were so in love, and things were going so great for Arthur and Kate Keller. They could not be happier. Well, they thought they couldn't. You see, after about a year and a half of marriage, Kate and Arthur had big news for the family. They were going to have a baby. And oh, everybody was so excited. You see, there had not been a baby girl born in the Keller family in almost 50 years. So they hoped and they prayed that this would be a baby girl. And they got what they asked for. On June 27th in the year 1880, a perfectly healthy baby girl was born to Arthur and Kate Keller. They named her Helen Everett Keller. Except that when they went to the First Presbyterian Church, where we all still go to church, believe it or not, and we still sit on the same pew as they did years ago, well, Arthur got the name mixed up. When the pastor asked him, what name would you like this child to be baptized with? He could not think of Helen's middle name. So he said, Helen Adams Keller. Adams being Kate's maiden name. She was Kate Adams before she became Kate Adams Keller. So that's what stuck. So officially, her name is Helen Adams Keller. And as she was born and as she grew up there at Ivy Green, at least the first year and a half of her life, she loved it. She loved the beautiful sunsets that we see in the fall. She loved the beautiful flowers that Aunt Evelyn grew. And she especially loved the dogs and other animals that lived close by on Ivy Green property. But things would change for Helen, and things would change for the family. You see, in February 1882, on a cold night, probably a little colder than it is here today, well, the snow was falling. Kate had been out with Helen playing in the snow. And as she gave her a warm bath and tucked her into bed, she realized the child had a terrible fever. They didn't know back then really what to do for fevers except to take cold rags and wrap them around you, and hopefully the fever would break. We've had an awful lot of fevers this day and time in our country, in our world, right, with the COVID going on. It was kind of like that, I guess. Nobody really knew what to do. and everybody was trying to find a way just to survive it. Well, the Kellers wrapped Helen in cold rags, and they hoped their fever would go away, but it didn't. So they sent word for the doctors to come, and the doctor came out the next day, Dr. Nelson, and he looked over the baby and he shook his head. He didn't think she was going to make it. She made it through the next 3 days. She was pretty tough. And when the 3 days were over, the fever went away just as suddenly as it had come. But when it did something nobody could ever imagine. The high fever not only took away Helen Keller's eyesight, it also took away her hearing. And Helen would be both blind, unable to see, and deaf, unable to hear for the rest of her life. So how'd she do it? It was tough sledding, believe you me. I don't sometimes see how she even survived, but she had to grow up like we all do. Without sight, though, and without hearing, in a dark and silent world. She knew a couple of signs. If she wanted something to eat, she would find her way to the outdoor kitchen. And she would imitate her mother putting butter on bread by taking her hand and spreading the butter on make-like bread. If she was thirsty, she would imitate holding a cup and putting it to her lips. If she would want ice cream, she would shiver like she was cold. That didn't mean give her a coat. That meant give her an ice cream cone. And by the way, she loved ice cream cones as much as I do, I think. But every day, Helen Keller got older. And every day, her parents felt like they lost touch with her. How were they to communicate with her? How were they even to tell her simple things, like they love her? Well, Helen Keller starts really rebelling. She can't communicate with the world around her. She's angry. She locks her mother in a pantry one day and lays outside on the floor laughing at her mother trying to get out. She takes a pair of scissors when she and her best friend Martha were playing with paper dolls. She feels Martha's long pigtails and she proceeds to cut them off. Martha didn't know what in the world she was going to cut next, so she got out of there as fast as she could, hollering for Mrs. Keller to help her. One day, though, Mrs. Keller is reading a book called Charles Dickens. It's on your screen. A book called American Notes. It was written by Charles Dickens, which picture is on your screen. And she reads that a girl, actually a young woman by this point, is living in Boston, Massachusetts at a place called the Perkins School for the Blind. And she knows how to sew and do math and dress herself. And she can communicate with the world. And Mrs. Keller thinks, oh, if our daughter can just do that. So what did they do? They loaded Helen up on a train with her father and her Aunt Evelyn, and they took her to Baltimore, Maryland, right outside our nation's capital of Washington, D.C., to find the doctor whose name was in that book, Dr. Alexander Graham Bell. He's on your screen as well. If you look at the left-hand picture of him, he's a very famous man. He invented a lot of different neat inventions, but his most successful, the telephone. Yes, he invented the telephone. Now, it's not probably the telephone you think of today. Everybody has cell phones, right? I have mine right here. It's giving me messages already. But the old phones that some of your grandparents may have in your homes that hang on the walls or maybe sit on the desk, that's what Dr. Bell invented. His wife was deaf. His mother-in-law was deaf, meaning they could not hear. And so he was also inventing other things. And the Kellers thought, maybe they can help my daughter. Well, Dr. Bell did meet the Kellers, and he also met little Helen. He loved them. Sorry, I forgot to silence my phone. He loved them, especially Helen. And as he thought about how he could help the young girl, he thought of a school, the Perkins School for the Blind. Remember, the school that the young lady, Laura Bridgman, still lived there. And he asked Arthur Keller, he said, I want you to do something for me. I want to help your daughter, but I can't invent anything at the moment. I want you to reach out to the Perkins School for the Blind and ask if they have anyone that could come and teach her. Well, the lady on the left side of your screen, she was available. Her name was Anne Sullivan. She was only 19 years old. She had just graduated from high school, not college. She hadn't gone to college like your teachers have. She had just graduated from high school, and she had grown up here. It looks like a mansion to most people. It's one of the biggest houses I've ever seen, too. But it was not a mansion. It was called the Tewksbury House. It's where children who didn't have anybody to take care of them went. They didn't go to school very much. They simply scrubbed floors, did laundry, and at night they would get tired. Sometimes they weren't allowed to take baths or wash their hands. And so every night when this happened, and Anne Sullivan and her little brother, Jimmy, would lie on their cots trying to go to sleep, they would rub their eyes. And every time she rubbed her eyes without washing her hands, she put germs in her eyes. She got a disease called trachoma. You don't have to remember what it's called, but I tell you what happens. Today we can control it with medications, but back in the 1880s, we couldn't. Hard bumps grew underneath your eyelids, and every time you blinked, you rubbed the outside of your eye called your cornea. You would eventually go blind. And Anne Sullivan was well on her way. She arrived in Tuscumbia, Alabama on the train, March 3rd, 1887, a few months before Helen's 7th birthday. You can see the two of them together on the left. The first thing she did when she arrived, and Helen met her on the front porch, by the way, is she grabbed Helen Keller's hand, and I'm not sure if it was the right or the left, but she grabbed one of them and she started spelling letters of the manual alphabet into her hand. And you can see those letters on your screen, or most of them. The problem was Helen didn't know what letters were. She didn't know the manual alphabet. So it was Annie's job to help teach it to her. And what she did was she gave Helen objects. One of those first objects was a doll. You see it lying in her lap. She grabbed her left hand, as you see in the picture. Excuse me. And she spelled the letters D-O-L-L into Helen's hand. You see, you couldn't just spell it in the air because she can't see. You had to spell it into her hand so she could feel it. So she spelled D-O-L-L over and over and hoped that Helen would know that a D-O-L-L was what was in her lap. But she didn't. She didn't understand. So Annie had a bright idea. She took Helen to the cottage and she asked her parents if that could be their schoolhouse for 2 weeks. They would live there. She would teach Helen how to dress herself, how to tie her boots, how to brush her teeth, brush her hair, how to eat properly using a spoon, folding her napkin when she was done. And she would continue to teach her the manual alphabet. But after 2 weeks were up, the Kellers really wanted to see their daughter. So they came back to the house to live. And this is one of the first lessons Helen Keller learned from her teacher. It's caught on video that I'm going to show you here from The Miracle Worker, the first Miracle Worker movie that was ever made about Helen Keller. It's my dear friend Patty Duke, who is no longer with us, is playing Helen Keller, the little girl. Anne Bancroft is playing her teacher. And we think this is probably what happened. And I have to tell you that it's pretty rough. Helen wasn't the easiest to teach. So take a look at this.
Yes. See. E. K. E. Do as my fingers do, never mind what it means. Now. O. L. Think it over. L. Imitate now. Understand later. End of the first lesson. Oh, good old Matt. Always taught you when you manners.
So you can see Helen was a pretty tough cookie to deal with. But what she learned what letters were, you will see in this next video what happens. You will see after the family had a huge dinner one night, Aunt Sullivan wanted to show off Helen Keller's abilities to eat with her spoon instead of her hands. She was really excited about this, except Helen didn't cooperate. She and Aunt Sullivan had the biggest food fight Tuscumby has ever seen. The rest of the family left the room, and the only thing left on the table was a pitcher of water. But Helen Keller found that before Aunt Sullivan did. And as right as Aunt Sullivan came towards her, she took the pitcher of water and threw it where she thought her teacher's face was. And it went all over Aunt Sullivan. Aunt Sullivan was so mad, she marched Helen Keller out the dining room, into the hall, and out to the family water pump where they got their water. And this is where the miracle takes place. This is a scene of what we think happened and how Helen learned that everything in the world has a name. Here we go.
I think some compromise is called for. Bring a plate. Please! Occasionally, another hand can smooth things out. There. Now, shall we start all over? I think we've started all over.
Don't get up. Don't smooth anything else out from me. Rummy's up here in any way. I treat her like a teeny child because I ask her to see. I expect her to see. Don't undo what I do. Where you take her to make her do this picture again. All right. Come. No, she's not here. Come. W-A-T-E-R, water. It has a name. W-A-T.
Oops. So that day, she learned the word water. That was so important because once she learned one word, she knew that everything else around her had a name. Within the next 6 months, with the help of her teacher, Ann Sullivan, she learned almost 600 new words. She learned to read Braille, which is what blind people read, raised dots with their fingertips. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And she even learned addition, subtraction, and multiplication tables up to 5. So she was learning very rapidly. You can see her in the picture on the left. Helen is the oldest girl. And then how I'm related to her is the little sister. My great-grandmother was Helen Keller's only sister. And so the two were very close. And so I kind of just put that there to show you. The next thing that Aunt Sullivan wanted to teach Helen was how to write. Helen knew that people communicated by writing. She would often go to her father's office and he would be writing with a pencil and paper. And so her father carved every letter of the alphabet into pieces of wood so that she could feel how they were formed. Okay. And once she memorized how each letter was formed, they gave her a pencil, paper, and what we call a straight edge, or what you know as a ruler, to keep the line straight, the letter straight. And they taught her how to put words together, to spell them. And you can see on the left, there's some really simple words like cat, cold, load, call, good, goodbye. But just a month, 6 weeks, a little over a month later, if you look to the right, she's actually writing letters. She is writing a letter about her doll that's sick, and the doctor will give the doll medicine. You can see she's really learning. And at the bottom, she writes goodbye, and then she signs her signature, Helen Keller. That's how she always signed her signature. It never changed. It was always capital letters, but some were smaller than the others. So that's interesting. You can tell if it's, a Helen Keller real signature or not by simply looking at the block style writing that she did. Now, the Kellers had a hard decision to make. As Helen got older, they really needed a school that she could go to and learn and really become something great, because they knew she was smart and they knew she had the will to do so. So they let her go with Ann Sullivan back to the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston. Now, Boston, Massachusetts is a long way from Tuscumbia, Alabama. It takes about a couple of days on a train. So you can imagine she couldn't come home like on the weekends. It would be too long. She couldn't get back in time. So she often stayed at Perkins. She and Ann Sullivan had like an apartment, because most of the people that went to school here were residents that stayed all year long, kind of like a boarding school. Okay. And she stays there. She goes to middle school, high school. She graduates from there when she's 16 years old. And then she tells Ann Sullivan she wants to learn to speak. She knows that people speak with their mouths and listen with their ears. And she wants to do that too, even though she can't hear. So they go to the Horace Mann School for the Deaf. Helen Keller takes 11 lessons and she learns to speak. It was very difficult. And this is a video later in life that the two of them, Ann Sullivan on the right and Helen Keller on the left, do to show you how Ann Sullivan played the role in helping Helen learn to speak. Because back in those days, deaf people did not talk. They were what we call mute. They did not say anything. But Helen wanted to show the world that deaf and blind people can do some of the same thing that their sighted and hearing peers could do. So take a look at this. We'll probably watch most of it, maybe not all of it. You have to listen very closely. It's very old. Ann Sullivan is very old. And this is the only voice of Ann Sullivan that we have today, the only recording of her voice. Here we go.
Words appear in a black and white Fox Movie-Tone News film. How Helen Keller Learned to Talk. Mrs. Macy and the famous deaf, dumb, and blind pupils she has taught for years give you a demonstration.
It is the only existing record of Annie Sullivan's voice.
Helen and Annie sit on a bench.
When I saw Helen Keller first, she was 6 years and 8 months old. She had been blind and deaf and mute since her 19th month as the result of an illness. She had no way of communicating with those around her except a few imitative signs that she had made for herself. A push meant go and a pull meant come and so on. She had observed that we did not use the hands when we were talking to each other. And I let her see by putting her hand on my face how we talk with our mouths.
Helen touches Annie's face.
She felt the vibration of the spoken word. Instantly, she spelled, I want to talk with my mouth.
Helen smiles.
That seemed impossible. But after experimenting for a time, we found that placing her hand in this position,
She touches Helen's thumb.
the thumb resting on the throat, right at the larynx, the first finger on the lips, the second on the nose, we found that she could feel the vibration of spoken words. For instance, the throat, she feels the G, the hard G, guh. And on the lips, she feels and the K sound. On the lips, she feels the V, with the second finger on the nose, the nasal sounds, the
Her hand rests on Annie's face.
The first word she learned to articulate was the little word it.
Her finger touches Annie's moving lips.
With the hand in this position, I made the vowel I. She felt it. I.
Helen repeats the letters after Annie.
Then I made the T. She feels it with the finger on her lips, on my lips. Then I put the two letters together to form the word it. And the first word was learned.
Annie grins sweetly.
After her seventh lesson, she was able to speak the sentence word by word. I am not dumb now.
So that gives you an idea of how Helen Keller learned to speak. And that was very important for her because she would give a number of speeches throughout her life. Next, she wanted to go to college. She wanted to go to Harvard University. There was a problem. Only men were allowed at Harvard. The girls had to go across the street to a school called Radcliffe College that you see in your picture and or see on your screen. Helen Keller entered Radcliffe College in 1900. She majored in English. She graduated 4 years later in 1904, and she became the first deaf-blind person in the entire world ever to graduate from college. And it was really difficult. She did not have special allowances. They did not let Anne Sullivan in a room when she was testing. They wanted to make it as fair as possible, and Helen wanted it as fair as possible because she wanted to show the world that people with disabilities can do things. They can contribute to the world around them. While she was in college, she wrote her first book with the help of Anne Sullivan's soon-to-be husband, who was actually a professor of English across the street at Harvard. She would write her autobiography, The Story of My Life. Now, any of you that know anything about the library probably know that an autobiography is a true story that someone writes about themselves. And so Helen's autobiography, The Story of My Life, was her first. It's her most famous. It's in 50 languages around the world today, and we're still printing it. This is one of the new covers from recent years. But anyway, Helen Keller loved to write. And after she wrote The Story of My Life and it became a bestseller, then she would buy a farmhouse outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and rent them, Massachusetts, for herself and also her teacher and Mr. Macy. They would all live here. Helen loved animals, so it was a working farm. They had all different types of animals, but she especially loved dogs and horses. She loved the quiet countryside so she could write. She would write 13 books in all, and that seems like a lot, but she would write hundreds upon hundreds of newspaper articles, magazine articles, letters to kings, queens, governors, even presidents. Helen Keller wanted to leave the world a better place than she found it. And she often spoke her mind, spoke what she thought. This is Helen just at the farm, at the Rentham house with one of her horses. As I mentioned, she loved dogs and horses. So she loved being outside. She just didn't sit inside all day and write. She loved living life to the fullest. This is her dog, Mr. Hitz. Some girls from Radcliffe actually gave her Mr. Hitz as a puppy as a graduation gift because they knew she loved animals. And this is a Boston Terrier and her first and one of her first loves as well. Helen Keller never got married. She never had any children, but she fell in love one time. A younger man by the name of Peter Fagan asked to date her. And they got caught kissing in the library. Don't do that, especially if it's your own library, which it was Helen's. Anne Sullivan caught them kissing, and she sent Helen back to Alabama on the train to Montgomery to visit her family that lived there on Felder Avenue. And Peter followed her on the train. He loved her. He wanted to marry her. And he sent her a note in Braille that said, "Meet me on the front porch at midnight if you want to marry me." So where do you think Helen Keller was? Well, she was on the front porch at midnight. The only problem was Peter never came. She fell asleep waiting for him. And we don't know if she ever knew what happened to him. We feel that somebody in the family kept him from coming to see her that night because they did know about this Peter from Anne Sullivan. But who knows what happened? All I know is she never got any married and she never had any children. So it was kind of sad for Helen that she lost out on that opportunity. But she said, maybe it just wasn't meant for me. So she had a good attitude about it. Helen loved to read. She believed that reading was the most important thing you do. I hope all of you that are listening today pick up a book at some point and read it. Whether you're going to bed, I usually read right before I go to sleep because it kind of winds me down from the day. My daughter reads all day long. She loves to read, but it's very important to know what's going on in your world and knowing what is going on around you. So take the time to read. Helen Keller read over 10,000 Braille books. So my smaller kids say her AR points, whatever those are, will be really cool. She'll have really big, high numbers. How did she read? Well, she read using her fingertips. You see, Braille is raised dots that blind people read actually with their little fingertips. And McDonald's has a Braille menu. So do other places I know of. There's Braille usually on especially new buildings that have signs for the women's restroom, the men's restroom. The blind people can read it with their fingertips so they know what restroom they're going into. You see part of the Braille alphabet on your screen. Part of it's cut off because I had to make it fit the screen. But each letter has 6 cells. You see the 6 circles underneath it? For instance, look at B. It has 6 circles underneath the letter B, but only 2 are blackened or colored in, okay? Those are the ones that show up on paper. So if 2 dots on the left-hand side, one on top of the other, show up, blind people feel that and they know that's a B. 2 letters up top across, C. 2 letters across and 1 down on the right, a D. So whichever series of dots go with the letters, they have to memorize. And that's how they read, with their fingertips. What did Helen enjoy reading? Anything from the Bible. She loved poetry. She loved philosophy. And she loved anything written by this man, Mark Twain, who wrote Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn. She loved reading his accounts of life on the Mississippi River. back in the 1800s. She also loved reading anything by Alexander Graham Bell, the famous inventor who helped her find her teacher. You see here 2 pictures with Helen with Alexander Graham Bell. He didn't say, have a good time with your teacher. I hope Anne Sullivan works out when she's a little kid. He kept up with her. He wrote to her regularly. He had Anne Sullivan and Helen come to his home in Nova Scotia, which is kind of up above the state of Maine. And they would spend the summers with Dr. Bell and his family. So loved anything written by him. Of course, Anne Sullivan would spell to her any book that was not written into Braille. She spelled it in her hands using the manual alphabet that we saw earlier. This is a very famous picture of Anne Sullivan and Helen Keller. They were together for 50 years. Can you imagine dedicating 50 years of your life to somebody? Well, that's what Anne Sullivan did. And this picture was actually made into a United States postage stamp. I'm sorry, the picture isn't really clear, but you can see it only cost 15 cents back then. And that was when I was about 9 years old. Vice President of the United States, Walter Mondale, flew to Tuscumbia, Alabama to present my grandmother with the first stamp, which was a really cool time in my life. After Helen wrote the book and did some things, writing she wanted to do, she didn't just stop there. She had to make a living for her and her teacher. So they decided to go on the road to large cities, and people would pay about $2,500 a show for Anne Sullivan and Helen Keller to tell the story of how a deafblind woman from Alabama learned, how she learned to think, how she learned to write, how Anne Sullivan broke through that dark and silent world. And you can see Helen's in a light colored dress, Anne's in the dark. And then Hollywood started calling. When Helen was in Los Angeles, one day a producer approached her, and they wanted to make a movie about her life called Deliverance. Now, I have to tell you, it was an old black and white movie, and I'm actually going to show you a little bit of it. Not much talking. Let me see what's going on. Not much talking in it. And it looks like, hold on just a minute. Let's see if I can get this. Okay, hang on just a minute. Sometimes this happens. Okay, let me see if I can get back in. Get you back in here. Okay, so it's not going to let me show that. I'm sorry. I'm not going to be able to show you that right now. I'll try to fix it after the program, and hopefully next time, if you are able to view it, you can. But you can go under YouTube and type in Helen Keller Deliverance with your parents' or teacher's permission, and it will show you a little bit of that. I'm not sure why that's not working. But Helen Keller actually was a pretty good actress. She danced. She rode a horse. She did some neat things in her acting career, but they were older movies, not like Minions or Trolls or anything cool that we see this day and time. And she actually won an Academy Award for Best Documentary, and you can see her holding that award here. Here's part of the in her story that she won the award for. So this isn't Deliverance. This is actually another documentary she won the award for. Here, take a quick look at it.
In this room sits a remarkable woman. She is Miss Helen Keller. She does not see the room or the book that she's reading. She sees nothing. She does not hear the rustling of the curtains behind her. She hears nothing. She is deaf and blind. But if you enter a room, she will know it. Your lightest footfall will tell her you are coming. She'll even tell her who you are, if she knows you, as she knows our old friend, Polly Thompson. Polly has been with Helen Keller 40 years. For nearly half of these, she has been Helen's only companion, Helen's eyes and ears upon the world. She talks with Helen by a finger system in which each letter has a sign, like this. Reaching out beyond her dark and soundless night, Helen depends most on touch. Two other senses remain. There is taste and there is smell. Scent, the scent of objects and places and people, tells Helen much, the free man with eyes and ears. But her hand is her chief link with the outer world, with Polly, with Anne, the part-time helper, with everyone she encounters.
So you can see a little bit of that documentary. It's talked about Polly Thompson. Anne Sullivan would pass away, and Helen Keller would need somebody, a secretary, a companion, to come live with her so she wouldn't be alone. And that woman would be Polly Thompson from Scotland. Helen and Polly loved doing fun things. Helen, like I said, didn't just sit in a corner and write or sit there and twiddle her thumbs. She was active. She loved to go boating on the Hudson Bay, and you see her there. She's with a bright white dress on the right. She loved to save her lunch and feed to the seagulls. And someone once asked her why she did that. And she said, well, I can't hear them and I can't see them. But when I throw that food up to the air, I can feel the vibrations of their wings. And it makes me think as if thousands of angels are surrounding me. She loved riding horses. This is her horse Phantom that she's on top of here. She had several accidents riding horses. One time a horse took her under a tree that had low-lying limbs that Helen Keller wasn't able to see and actually knocked her off the horse, and she got what we call a concussion, which is an injury to your head. She loved listening to music, and you probably are saying, well, you told me she's deaf, she can't hear. The same way she listened to vibrations of Anne Sullivan's throat, remember, voice of Anne Sullivan speaking, she could do that to an opera singer that's singing a song for her here and feel the vibrations of those notes. But what makes her incredibly special is at the age of 44, she joined what we call the American Foundation for the Blind, and it's still going today. It was headquartered in New York City. Today, it's in the Washington, D.C. area, and she became their counselor on national and international relations. She would hold this job for almost 44 years. It's amazing that she was called their ambassador for that long. She and Polly Thompson, Polly on the right, Helen on the left, would travel the world on behalf of the United States of America to help others who had handicapped people living in their countries. She would help build schools. While she was traveling, Anne Sullivan, as I mentioned earlier, got sick, and Helen had to come home. And she came home just in time to speak with Anne Sullivan. The two of them spelled into each other's hands. We do not know what was said that day, but we know right after they spoke, Anne Sullivan closed her eyes for the last time, and she passed away shortly afterwards. She was buried in the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., where her remains still are today. But Helen would travel to over 35 different countries in the world. She would go to India, as you see her here in the middle, dressed as an Indian woman would dress. She would meet with their Prime Minister, Nehru. She would help change laws for the handicapped. Here she's in South Africa, where her great-great-great-grandfather was a doctor of biology at Cape Town, South Africa. And she wanted the African people and tribes to get along. Of course, they still don't get along today, but it's not because Helen Keller didn't go over there and try. She's in the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, countries we've heard about in recent years. Helen Keller traveled over to this area and this region before we were even having any trouble with them over there. And she's in the polka dotted dress. She's feeling a bird that a blind boy has raised. That's kind of how his family made their money. And Helen wanted to meet him and see what he did to help his family. She went to the continent of Australia, the land down under, where she actually rode a crocodile. Now, I have to tell you, his mouth was taped up, which I don't know if the humane people like that or not, but they didn't let her ride it with the mouth completely open. And she also rode a giant tortoise. The children, as you can see, of Australia loved Helen Keller. She went to Japan 3 different times. She loved the people of Japan, and they loved her. I was on an airplane not too long ago before COVID hit, and I was sitting by a lady who was a teacher from Japan. She was coming to visit her daughter in Los Angeles, and she realized my name, Keller, and she was like, oh, I know Helen Keller. She knew the story. She had learned it as a child in Japan. And she looked at me after we talked for a while, and she said, you know, I don't think Helen Keller belongs to Alabama or even the United States. In my opinion, Helen Keller belongs to the world. I thought that was a pretty neat statement. Helen Keller knew every president, from Calvin Coolidge that you see right here with her at the White House, to John F. Kennedy, my absolute favorite United States president. Helen Keller's on the far right. She's shaking hands when she is ancient. She is in her 80s here with John F. Kennedy, but she loved President Kennedy and loved what he stood for. She also met President Eisenhower. He became a good friend of hers. And when this picture was taken, she was actually feeling his face to see what he looked like. But instead of someone telling her that he was ticklish on his nose, nobody did. And when she touched the tip of his nose, as she's about to do on your screen, he starts laughing hysterically. Well, Helen Keller's blind and deaf, so she didn't know what he's doing. She puts her hands to feel his lips, except his mouth is open from laughing. She puts her hand accidentally in his mouth, and when she realizes what she's done, she jerks it out in a loud voice in front of all the reporters. She says, "Oh, Mr. President, what a big mouth you have." So that's Helen Keller's story with Eisenhower. Helen Keller was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, or the Congressional Medal of Honor. Sometimes they call them both. But it was she was, I believe, number 30 in the world to ever get that. It's a pretty hard thing to get. You can't get one. You have to be a civilian, not a U.S. soldier, because you get other things if you're a U.S. soldier. But you have to do something significant for the country and for your world. This is a really cool piece. I hope we can play this. Yes, the Alabama Public Television did on Helen Keller. It's really short. It's just a minute. I want to show it to you.
Tuscumbia native Helen Keller is popularly remembered as the deaf and blind child who learned sign language from her teacher Ann Sullivan at the Keller home, Ivy Green. But during her adult life, she was a tireless activist on behalf of workers and women's rights, a prolific author, and an unofficial U.S. ambassador to the world. Her most famous publication is her best-selling 1903 autobiography, The Story of My Life. Through her work with the American Foundation for the Blind, Keller advocated for broadened educational and employment possibilities for blind people, and the State Department funded her international travel and advocacy of people with disabilities. In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson awarded her the Congressional Medal of Freedom. A bronze statue depicting a young Helen Keller represents Alabama in the U.S. Capitol, and she is featured on our state quarter.
Helen Keller received a lot of different awards throughout her life, and we have a lot of them here in Tuscumbia for you to see if you come visit. A lot of them are at the AFB archives in Washington. But the best experience of her life, she said, was visiting U.S. soldiers who had fought for her freedom. And this is just a couple of shots of her doing that. You can see they loved her, admired her, and she loved and admired them. It's quite incredible how she connected with U.S. soldiers. This is Helen Keller on our 80th birthday. Her favorite color was blue, believe it or not, because blue stood for water to her. Green was cool grass, yellow was the bright sun, red was something fire hot. So she associated colors with kind of things. This is Helen Keller gardening. Once she retired from public life, she loved to garden. She could smell a flower, feel it, tell you exactly what kind it was. She also loved to play checkers. She was pretty good at it, they say. She loved writing, and this is Helen Keller writing again on her what we call a braille writer. It's kind of like a computer keyboard, but it has paper in it, which I know is a very long thing to explain to you. So I won't do that today. This is Helen Keller sipping afternoon tea with her dogs, and she's on the ground there, and Polly Thompson with her. This is her last home. It's called Arkin Ridge, and it's in Westport, Connecticut. The Kellers no longer own this home, but we visited several times. It's a very beautiful place. This is Helen Keller just out in the back. She loved nature. And I just want to show you, we don't have very long, but I want to show you about a minute of just Helen Keller as she's older, okay? This is just her on her morning walk. She did this every morning that she could, that it wasn't snowing or something like that.
Every morning, Helen goes for a walk along a 1,000-foot handrail built by a loving friend to guide her. 1,000 feet where she is alone and free. The walk seldom varies, but for Helen, it is always full of small, unexpected events. Helen is known from childhood to those with sight cannot realize that one does not need eyes to see the world.
So that just goes to show you a little bit of what she was like when she was older and kind of retired from public life. Helen Keller got pneumonia in June 1968. She was hospitalized, but she had come home from the hospital and she was reading that night. She had been coughing a lot, so her nurse, Wendy Corbley, came in to check on her. And actually, Helen was not breathing. It was too late to call help. She had already passed away. And so her death date would be June 1st, 1968. She died at the ripe old age of 87. She would have been 88 in 26 more days. And she was buried here in the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. And it's a very beautiful place. If you ever get to go visit it, I'm not going to let you do this video because it just takes so long. But she's buried here in the bottom of the National Cathedral in a place called St. Joseph's Chapel. And she's behind these gates, you see. She and Anne Sullivan and Polly Thompson are all three. Their remains are together. And on the left is a plaque that's outside of the gate that says that Helen Keller is actually buried here. This is the Helen Keller statue that represents Alabama and the U.S. Capitol. It's the most visited statue, we're told. It is also the only one with a child and the only one with a disability. It was really an awesome thing to have Governor Bob Riley back in 2009 put this representing our state of Alabama. So why is Helen Keller here? Why is she in your history books? Well, I hope you learned a little bit today about why she is here, how she defied history. No other person who had been disabled made a difference in the world like she did. And let me just say, that she not only fought for the disabled. Did you know she was a member of the NAACP? She actually fought for civil rights. Girls, she fought for a right to vote. You couldn't vote when Helen was born, but you could by the time she died. Helen Keller just wanted to do the things that are right in life. And I think we can all take lessons from a great Alabamian like Helen Keller and try to do the right thing no matter what area or that we work in or live in or go to school in. So that's what I have for you today on Helen Keller. I hope you enjoyed our field trip. I know it's 9:59 and about time to shut off. Anybody have any questions? Are there any in our chat? There's 13 chats going on. Oh yeah, everyone's talking about what schools. Okay. Well, if you ever need me or have any questions, teachers or students, I do correspond. I do visit schools live. If you ever want me to come visit your class and I'm nearby, you can reach me at helenkellerfoundation.org. So if you just go into that, helenkellerfoundation.org, all one word, and go under staff, you can find me. Thank you, Mr. Rembert. I'll turn that back to you in Montgomery.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Thompson. Boys and girls, we certainly hope you enjoyed today's journey in the life of Helen Keller. I hope that you learned a lot about her that you didn't know before. At this time, all I'm going to say, students, is enjoy the rest of your day. And teachers, please don't forget to send me your rosters. Well, not rosters, but your number counts. Thank you. Have a great day.